Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. If you're familiar with the gunfight at the OK Corral, or movies such as 310 to Yuma, you've probably heard of Contention City. In the early 1880s, it was one of the most important towns in southern Arizona. Sitting on the San Pedro River, it served the silver mines upstream. Well, today, there's no town here. So we're going to head down to where Contention City was and see what, if anything, remains. We are starting out today in the San Pedro River Valley, about 10 miles northwest of Tombstone. I feel like Contention City is one of the really great Old West town names, up there with the likes of Tombstone and Deadwood. They really had some tough sounding names back then. Nowadays, every new community is named something like Beautiful View or Flowerville, trying to get you there. Back then, it seems like the names were trying to keep you away. Right now, we are walking down the railbed of what was originally the Arizona and Southeastern Railroad, which was built in the late 1880s. There were several railroads that came through the San Pedro River Valley in the late 1800s, and the railroad is one of the things that made Contention City so important, at least briefly. The reason there were so many railroads is because of all the mining in this area, and the mines are why Contention City ever existed at all. The river is about a mile or two below us right now, but I imagine this area looks pretty much the same as it did in Wyatt Earp's day. We're going to follow this railbed a little bit longer, then we're going to turn east towards the river. The railroad tracks that used to be here were removed around 2007. Contention City was actually on the other side of the river from where we are, and it's rained a bit in the last few days, so I'm not exactly sure how we're going to cross the river yet. We're probably going to end up getting wet today. In 1877, a prospector named Ed Schieffelin struck a rich silver vein in the hills southeast of here. He named the claim Tombstone, and before long, a town with the same name exploded around it. Tombstone grew fast. It had banks, churches, an ice cream parlor, and depending on who you ask, around 110 saloons. What it didn't have was water. But as word spread, more prospectors poured into the area. Long after the days of the mining boom, all of this land was part of a really large ranch, and you can still see some of the fencing off to the side here. This would have been used to keep cattle off the railroad. The railroad bed starts to fade into the brush up ahead. It's only been out of use about 20 years, but it's already starting to disappear. Luckily for us, this is where we turn and start heading towards the river. We are still about a mile or so from Contention City. I suspect the road that we're walking on was once a wagon road, but I don't know that for sure. There was wagon service from Contention City to a number of different towns in Arizona, such as Tucson and Benson, and of course Tombstone. So getting back to the history of Contention City, in 1879, two prospectors, Ed Williams and Jack Friday, were camping nearby when their mules decided they've had enough and bolted into the night. The mules were dragging a heavy chain, and when the guys tracked them the next morning, they noticed something shiny. The chain had scraped away the dirt and revealed a massive silver lode. Now, legendary prospector Ed Schieffelin, the guy who basically owned Tombstone, claimed they were on his turf. He fought them for it. Eventually, they split the claim. The upper end became the Grand Central, and Schieffelin's half, he named it Contention, just to remind everyone how much of a headache the legal battle had been. And the town, of course, was named after the mine. We're coming up to another railroad bed. As I mentioned earlier, the railroad bed that we were on previously was for the Arizona and Southeastern, and it was built in the late 1880s, so Contention City was already dying by then. But this one here is for the New Mexico and Arizona Railroad, and it reached Contention City in March 1882, and for a brief time it was the closest railroad station to Tombstone, until the line was extended 3 more miles to Fairbank, which is in this direction. And it looks like there's still some sort of box here from the railroad days. Now, I believe this line was completely abandoned in the 1960s. Up until 1891, it actually crossed the river back in this direction. But once Contention City was pretty much dead, there was no reason for it to cross to the east side of the river anymore. Let's take a closer look at this box. I believe this would have housed the signaling and switching equipment. There is something else over here, and I have no idea what this is. I'm actually pretty surprised that this isn't full of bullet holes. Check this out. While all the rails and rail ties are gone, it looks like the wiring is still here. If we were to follow this rail bed about 3 more miles in this direction, we'd reach the ghost town of Fairbank. It looks like there's at least still one railroad tie left. But we want to head this way, hopefully towards Contention City. Because they eventually moved the tracks away from Contention City, we're not going to actually follow the tracks. We're going to head to the east a little bit. Hopefully we can find an easy way to cross the river. I did bring an extra pair of socks, just so I don't have to walk back with wet socks. The San Pedro River is usually not too deep. There was a lot more water here back in the Contention City days, but the water table has dropped a lot since then. Now that we're closer to the river, there are some actual trees, but these definitely look like Old West trees. All of the mines were closer to Tombstone, but since there was hardly any water near Tombstone, a number of towns were built along the San Pedro River. Silver ore needs water to be processed, so the towns supported the mills. 3 mills were in the Contention City area. Here's an old can, always a sign we're getting close to something. I just noticed something in the brush over here. It looks like there's some sort of structure. My guess is this dates to the ranching days, but I'm not sure yet. It definitely looks old. We'll take a look inside. Hopefully there's not javelina in there or something. A bobcat. Huh. I thought this might be for water, but that's a pretty big opening on the other side. Let's see if I can get over there without getting too scratched up here. Well, the entrance is gated off, but I have no idea what this is. Like I said, at first I thought this was for water, but this is just too big of an opening. So maybe it was used to store feed for cattle. But if you have any idea what this might be, let me know in the comments. Take a look at these nails. You can tell how old this is just by these nails. They were handmade. I want to get to the river and get over to Contention City, but we keep running into stuff on this side of the river. Now there's a sign, and there's something else back in the brush. We'll take a look and see what the sign says. Luckily it's bright pink or I would have missed it. You'd think they would have put it closer to the road. Okay, so it's a BLM sign letting us know not to disturb this historic site. And I didn't even realize there was a historic site here. This must all be from the ranching days. Let's go check it out. All of this brush is just filled with thorns, so you gotta really work your way around it. Luckily, for the most part, it's pretty easy to get through. It looks like there's some sort of dish or maybe solar panels out here too. I don't think that's part of the historic site. Wyatt Earp had no idea what green energy is. So this was definitely for storing water. And it looks like the solar panel is connected to this. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Probably some sort of environmental testing. There's something else back here. And I have no idea what this is either. Maybe we just found a crashed UFO. I don't know. Alright, we're finally at the river, and it looks like this path ends at this big tree in front of us, so we'll have to find a way to get across. As we're getting closer, I'm not really seeing any water down there, so maybe it's going to be a lot easier than I thought to cross the river. If there is any water, we might be able to just jump across it. And what the heck is this thing? This pole with this wire coming out of it. And wow, look at the San Pedro River, or I guess the lack of a river. It's been raining the last few days, and it is absolutely dry. There is not a drop of water in the river here. It actually doesn't look like any water has flowed through here in a while, which makes the river crossing easier than I expected, at least. There's nothing worse than walking around with wet feet. If the river would have been like this in the 1880s, they never would have been able to run their silver mills, and Contention City would have never existed. But water usage and drought have changed this river a lot over the last 100 years. Alright, we've made it across the mighty San Pedro River. And here's a look back at the river. And Contention City should be right up there. Before we head up to the town site, there's an island in the river here. I don't know if this is the island, but according to old stories from Contention City, there was an island right here where things got a little wild. The story goes that people would get drunk in the saloons, ride down to the river, and start betting on whether someone could jump their horse across to the island and back again. The town site should be up on this mesa in front of us. Contention was officially surveyed in September of 1879, and lots sold fast. By 1880, the town had pretty much everything you would expect to find in a western town. A post office, saloons, hotels, a blacksmith, a butcher, general stores, a Chinese laundry, and stagecoach connections to Tombstone and Tucson. By the mid-1880s, around 200 people lived here. Small by modern standards, but a serious town for the Arizona Territory. And I like that I'm currently following hoof prints from a horse to get to the town. It really adds to the Old West feeling of this place. But Contention City was a milling hub, a transportation stop, and a supply town for the silver mines of Tombstone. And it briefly became entangled in one of the most famous chapters of Western history. But before we get to that, there's another sign up ahead. We'll see what it says. But I believe we've arrived at Contention City. It says it's illegal to dig or remove anything. There was a cemetery here, but in the 1960s, grave robbers came and dug it all up. But here is what Contention City looks like today. There isn't much town left anymore. In fact, you wouldn't even know there was a town ever here if it wasn't for a random piece of wood here and there. It's amazing that a town that once had 200 people living here could pretty much all but disappear. Though I guess they did forget this piece of metal here. Probably the most famous gunfight to ever happen in the Old West was the gunfight at the OK Corral. Well, after that, Ike Clanton tried to have Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday prosecuted here in Contention City. And here's another piece of wood. A grand jury in Tombstone refused to indict the Earps and Doc Holliday. The shooting was technically ruled justified, but the Clanton faction wasn't satisfied, and Ike Clanton was determined to keep the pressure on. So he went looking for a friendlier courtroom. Instead of Tombstone, where the Earps had allies, Ike attempted to push the case here. For reasons that are still a little murky, whether it was jurisdictional issues or lack of cooperation, or the simple fact that the earlier hearings had already gone nowhere, no trial was ever held here either. It looks like we have what's left of an adobe wall here. It's kind of melted back into the earth, but you can kind of tell where a wall once was. Like most of the towns along the river, most buildings would have been made out of adobe. If you've ever seen the movie 3:10 to Yuma, both the original from the 1950s and the more recent remake, the ending takes place in Contention City. Neither movie looks much like this place really looked, but the 1950s version is probably closer. In the more recent one, Contention City is a pretty big town. I'm walking along the original rail bed. The railroad came right into town. In December 1881, Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday left their horses here in Contention, rented a wagon, and carried the wounded Virgil Earp north to Benson, where he could finally be put on a train out of Arizona. And here's what's left of an old railroad bridge. When the railroad reached town in 1882, there was actually a 2-story brick depot here. In March of 1882, after Morgan Earp was assassinated, his body was brought here for transport by rail back to California. So this place had a number of connections to the Earps. It looks like we may have found the town dump. There are cans all over the place. A big pile of cans is always the last thing remaining from any old town. This town was only around for about a decade, but I bet in that decade a lot of cans and bottles were left out here. I have a survey map of the town showing the different plots and the streets, but good luck trying to figure out where anything is. I think I'm walking on what was once San Pedro Street. Contention City did have its own gunfight as well. In 1886, newly elected Cochise County Sheriff John Slaughter tracked members of the Jack Taylor gang to a house here in town. When Slaughter and his posse raided the place, the Outlaws opened fire instead of surrendering. In the gunfight, Slaughter was clipped in the ear, and that was the only wound he ever took in his career as a lawman. One outlaw died in the fight, another escaped, only to be killed later by Mexican authorities. But the Jack Taylor gang was ended here in Contention City. This place had a pretty short life. The railroad arrived in Contention City in January 1882, but by the end of the year, it had reached Fairbank, which was closer to Tombstone, so the depot here wasn't as important anymore. Soon after, water was discovered closer to the mines, allowing mills to be built near Tombstone itself. Then flooding hit the mines in 1886 and 1887, made worse by the 1887 Sonora earthquake. The mills along the San Pedro shut down. And I think we may have found the last wall in Contention City. I wish I knew what this once was, but if this wall could talk. We're heading over to where the Contention Mill was right now, but without mills, without rail importance, without mining, Contention City died fast. The post office closed in 1888, and by 1890, the town was essentially gone. The railroad moved fully to the other side of the river, and by the 1920s, it wasn't even stopping here anymore. Eventually, all the land in this area was owned by the Boquillas Ranch, and there were still buildings here until the 1960s and 1970s, but the ranch started having problems with squatters, so eventually they had the remaining buildings torn down. Which is really a shame. It's too bad it couldn't have been preserved, but as I mentioned earlier, they were even having problems with grave robbing, so it's understandable that they did what they did. But this is where the Contention Mill once stood. This is probably the one part of Contention City where there's still a little bit left to see. Wow, check out this hole in the side of the hill. There is absolutely nothing supporting it. I am definitely not climbing in there. There is some sort of coil on the ground here. Ore would have been brought here, crushed into powder, and prepared for smelting. The sound of stamp mills would have echoed up and down this valley. Unlike the rest of the town, you can at least tell that there was something here. You'll often see stamp mills up against a hill like this, because ore would be brought to the top and work its way down as it became more and more refined. Well, I guess that other wall wasn't the last wall of Contention City. Here's what's left of that brick building that's off to the side of the mill in old pictures. And then there are bricks everywhere. And from here you can see how close the mill was to the river. Here's an old wooden flume coming from the mill towards the river. It's amazing how a town can just completely disappear. This place existed because of silver, railroads, and arguments over who owned what. And once the ore played out and the rail lines moved on, there was nothing left to keep people here. Today, there's no main street, no buildings, no saloons, just a name that outlived the town itself. So that's our look at Contention City, or at least what's left of it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.